Welcome back to Pink Flicks. Today I've brought you the movie called Schindler's List. It is an epic historical drama film from 1993 directed by Steven Spielberg. This film was nominated for 12 Oscars and won 7 of them, including Best Picture and Director. Spoiler alert. Watch out, and I hope you like it. The movie opens with a pair of hands lighting a candle and people are starting to pray. The candle smoke is turned into steam by a train engine, and now the film is black and white. In 1939, the Polish army was defeated by the German army in the initiating event of World War II. Jews in occupied Poland are being forced to move to major cities. On a train platform, a foldable table is set up where a single Jewish family registers as Jews. The single table becomes many tables and the single family becomes a large crowd. We then see a man pouring himself a drink and deciding on a suit jacket and cufflinks. He attaches a Nazi party pin to his jacket and grabs several bills. As he enters a nightclub, bribes the waiter and gets placed at a good table. We finally see the face of our protagonist, Oskar Schindler. He appraises the situation and notices several Nazi officials. Schindler buys them drinks in an attempt to gain their favor. By the end of the evening, Schindler is seated with an entire table of officials and club girls. He is treating a large table of Nazis and their friends to expensive food and fine wine. Schindler has his picture taken with everyone important at the table, as well as with dancers at the club. Schindler then visits Krakow's Judenrat, the Jewish council in charge of carrying out Nazi orders. He walks directly to the front line where he finds the accountant, Itzhak Stern. Schindler tells Stern that he needs Jews investors to help him buy enamelware factory. Since Jews by law cannot own businesses, Schindler tells Stern that he will pay the investors in product, not by money. He also wants Stern to run the business, but Stern initially refuses the offer and telling him that the Jews will not be interested. Schindler was not convinced and replied, "Tell them they should be." Next, he visits a church where Jewish smugglers conduct business. All of the smugglers are scared off, except one named Poldek Pfefferberg. Schindler tells Poldek he will need lots of luxury items in the coming months, and he says will not be a problem. The scene then turns into a large crowd of Jews marching above a bridge. It is March 20, 1941, the deadline for Jews to enter the ghetto. As the wealthy Jews are forced to leave the home, Schindler arrives at his new luxury apartment, recently freed by the Jewish family. A little Polish girl in the street shouts, "Goodbye Jews," over and over again. Poldek enters the ghetto with his girlfriend and is greeted by his friend Marcel Goldberg, who is now working as a policeman. After the Jews have been given their housing assignments, Stern brings businessmen to Schindler's car. Schindler is able to convince them to invest and sets up his factory. Schindler prefers to hire Jews, rather than Poles, because they are cheaper to employ. Stern explains to the Jews that working at Schindler's factory would allow them to leave the ghetto in order to buy needs. Before being allowed to work in the factory, Poldek explains that one must be deemed an essential worker. Stern realizes he can use Schindler's factory to help some of the people he knows. He begins forging documents to allow more Jews to qualify as essential workers. Stern then accompanies the people for whom he has forged documents to the registration desk. Schindler is unsure about who to hire as a personal assistant, as all of them are beautiful. When Stern was asked, "Whom you going to choose?" he then hires all women and takes a photo in front of the factory. With the help of Poldek, he brings rare fruits, cognac, chocolate, cheeses, and German cigarettes to send as a gift to high Nazi officials, and the information of the factory began to help with the upcoming German war. He also attached the photos he took with them early at the club and anticipated the enclosed bids will meet with your approval. As he hoped, all the officials are approved and Schindler enjoys his newfound wealth and status as Herr Director, while Stern handles all administration. While Schindler is with his mistress, Schindler's wife Emilie arrives in Krakow. She doesn't say anything though and instead joins Schindler to a nightclub, where he discusses the enormous amount of employees he manages. While the couple dances, Schindler's gaze is drawn to another woman. The couple is in bed together the next morning, when Emilie asks Schindler if he wants her to stay. She walks away when he doesn't answer. Back in Schindler's office, Stern brings a Jewish worker who is elderly and only has one arm. He frequently thanks Schindler for saving him and making him an essential worker. Following that, as Stern accompanies Schindler to his car, Schindler becomes enraged and asks him what the man's purpose is. The next morning, when the group of Schindler workers slowly moves through deep snow, the officers decide to make them stop and shovel. The man with one arm is struggling. The SS officers carry the man to the side and shoot him in the head, despite his protests at being an essential employee. The scene shifts to Schindler in an office, fuming about losing a day of work and losing a worker. A few days later, Schindler is in bed with his mistress. Poldek shows up and informs him that it's about Stern. Schindler then went to the train station in search of Stern. Schindler approaches a young man with the list of Jews, and the man informs that Stern is on the list. Young officer approaches and both tell him that the list is always right and Stern must not be an essential worker. Schindler then notes both of their names before assuring the two men that they will both be in southern Russia before the end of the month. Schindler finally finds him on a car as the train leaves. The young man with the list convinces the conductor to stop the train, and Stern is safely removed. He apologizes for forgetting his job card at home as he goes with Schindler. As the car passes by, two German officials explain the different ghettos to Herr Commandant Amon Göth. He arrives in Krakow to initiate the construction of a labor camp Plaszow, and to take control over the ghetto. Out of the car, the men show Göth his villa and he is disappointed by its size. They stopped walking as a group of girls lined up in front of them. Göth selects the prettiest one, Helen Hirsch, to be his maid. As he looks over at a construction site where a young woman is yelling at one of the officers. She runs up to Göth and explains what must be done to prevent the building from falling. Ignoring her protests, Göth orders the officer to shoot her. After she is dead, he orders the men to carry out her instructions. The following day, Göth explains the historical importance of his and his soldiers' actions. He speaks of how the Jews from this moment on will be erased from history. While Göth and other officers discuss plans, Schindler and his mistress ride horses through a wooded field. They pull up to a ledge that overlooks the ghetto and Schindler's face is filled with horror. A group of soldiers rushes into the ghetto and storms the apartments, tossing personal belongings from balconies. Poldek tells his girlfriend that they should flee through the sewers, and he will go first to ensure that everything is clear. The scene shifts to a doctor making poison vials and then sharing it with the nurses, who feed a vial to each of the sick. The patients are already dead when the soldiers arrive. Poldek's attempt to sneak through the sewers fails miserably. He then comes up and heard the officers, so he pretends to be ordered to clear the streets. They make fun of him and then ignore him. Schindler continues to look on, horrified, as his mistress tears up and asks him if they can leave. He sees a little girl in a red coat, the only color in the otherwise black and white scene, walking through the carnage. Men are lined up and shot. She escapes the line and goes upstairs to hide under a bed. That night, the soldiers gather and listen in all the buildings for the noise of those who are hiding. They start firing at all the buildings while one man plays the piano. Schindler now has to deal with the pressing issue of how to run his factory without his workers. Amon Göth steps onto his balcony, which overlooks work camp. He checks the ground for targets, comes to a halt next to a young woman tying her shoe, and shoots in the head. Woman wakes up topless in his bed, looks annoyed, and hides her face. The focus turns to Oskar Schindler entering Göth's villa and making his way to the dining room, where a group of Nazi leaders is seated for lunch. Schindler complains about losing workers and convinces Göth to allow him to build his own subcamp to shelter his factory workers. Itzhak Stern is required to remain at Plaszow as an accountant for Göth. Schindler tells Stern that he tried to get him out but it was unsuccessful. He claims he'll visit Plaszow once a week and keep an eye on him. Stern asks Schindler not to let things fall apart because he has worked too hard. Göth enters the metalworking factory at Plaszow. He approaches Rabbi Lewartow, an older man who makes hinges. He asks the rabbi to make a hinge while timing it. The rabbi can do it so quickly, and Göth wonders why there aren't any more hinges in his box. Despite the man's protests, that the machines were being recalibrated, he drags the priest outside to shoot him. However, Göth is unable to make either of his guns fire, so the rabbi is left unharmed. During Schindler's visit to Göth, Stern runs to the gate calling, Herr Director. He informs Schindler that the rabbi can turn out hinges in less than a minute and asks Schindler to employ him. Schindler remains silent but hands Stern his lighter. Stern bribes Marcel Goldberg with the lighter to send the rabbi to Schindler's factory. The woman named Regina Perlman meets with Schindler and begs him to hire her parents, who are now employed at Plaszow. Schindler screams at her for believing he would perform such favors and throws her out. Schindler then stormed into Stern's office and started yelling, wanting to know what he was supposed to do about Göth murdering people. He does not want his factory to be seen as a haven instead of a valued business. Stern asks if he's losing money. He claims that's not the point, but the risk of such actions is danger to him. Despite this, he lends Stern his watch in order to bribe Goldberg into moving Perlman's parents. Perlman is pleased when she sees them enter Schindler's factory. A few days later, Schindler and Göth standing out on his balcony. When the two men discuss power, he tells Schindler that his power comes from the Jews' fear of him. Schindler disagrees and says true power comes from having the ability to kill, but the will not to. The following day, Göth remembers Schindler's words. He first encounters a young boy who has placed a nice horse saddle on the ground. Instead of shooting him, he tells him to go on. The scene shifts to Göth entering his bathroom, where a boy is unable to clean stains from his tub. He asks him why use soap instead of acid, but then informs him that he is forgiven. He stands for a moment and catches his own reflection in the mirror. While the boy is rushing back to his quarters, Göth steps onto his balcony and shoots him. A group of Jewish women are discussing before bed, and one of them shares a story about gas chambers that she heard. The other women ignore it as impossible, yet all look uneasy as they try to sleep. The following day, the list makers and medics arrive at Plaszow. The Jews are forced out of their beds, stripped naked, and ordered to run in circles. Those deemed sick and unfit to work are separated and taken to Auschwitz. A few months later, Schindler was in the street examining ashes that are falling from the sky. Department D has ordered that all dead be retrieved and burned. The Jews are tasked with digging up the bodies and carrying them to a moving ramp that dumps them in with the pile of burning corpses. Schindler arrives to examine what is happening. Göth tells him that they are closing down Plaszow. All the Jews will be moved to Auschwitz. Schindler watches the scene in horror, and the body of the little girl in the red coat is among the dead. Back in Stern's office, Schindler informs him that he has ensured that you will be treated properly at Auschwitz. When Stern asks him what he plans to do, he says that he will return home with his money. Stern looks deeply unsatisfied with this decision. He assures Stern that this will all end one day and he must have a drink with him when it happens. Stern says that he better do it now. The two men share their first drink together. Schindler looks out the window, thinking about his situation as well as the condition of the Jews. He then begins to count his money. Back on Göth's balcony, he is walking back and forth, wondering why Schindler wants the Jews he has been working with. He asks where the money is in this effort, where the scam is. Schindler refuses to answer but asks him how much a Jew is worth to him. He plans to bribe Göth. Schindler and Stern are working on creating a list of Jews that will travel to Schindler's new factory in Moravia, Czech Republic. He keeps asking how many people are on the list and continue. When Stern discovers that Schindler is buying each and every Jew on the list, he is impressed and shocked. When the list is finally completed, he tells Schindler that the list is really good. It is life. The train carrying the men on the list arrives in Moravia safely. Schindler tells them that the women are on their way and there is hot soup and bread waiting for them inside the factory. Night approaches and the train pulls into a cold station filled with officers. The train accidentally directed to Auschwitz. The women are pulled from the train and lined up. After receiving word of this, Schindler rushes into action to make sure the women are returned safely to Moravia. Meanwhile, the women's heads are shaved and they are sent to an enclosed chamber. Fearing it to be a gas chamber, they all scream in terror as the doors close. However, they are relieved to find that it is just a shower room. After bribing the SS commander with diamonds, Schindler is able to reclaim his train of Jewish female workers and bring them to his factory. Schindler walks among the women as guards open the factory gate. Soon after, he informs all the soldiers that they are not permitted to kill workers without justification, and guards will not be allowed on the factory floor without Schindler's permission. He then meets his wife in church and asks her to live with him again. Schindler then brings her to the factory and introduces her to Stern and other workers. Stern then pulls him away to inform him that officials are unhappy with the quality of his shells. Schindler tells Stern to buy shells from other suppliers in order to reduce the number of shells produced. Schindler then says, he will be very unhappy if his factory ever produces shells that can be fired, regardless of the cost. Schindler rapidly loses money and goes bankrupt just as Germany surrenders. He calls a meeting with his entire staff, as well as the Nazi soldiers assigned to him, and announces the surrender. He tells the Jews to thank themselves and thanks Stern for survival. Schindler then turns to the German soldiers and tells them that he knows they have received orders to dispose of the Jews. He asks the soldiers not to shoot and return home as men, not killers. He then informs his workers that he must flee. He is a war criminal since he was a member of the Nazi Party and a profiteer of forced labor. He also tells his workers that they must now go and try to find their family members and friends. Schindler calls for 3 minutes of silence in memory of those who have died. That night, outside the factory, all the workers have gathered to bid farewell to Schindler. They remove their hats out of respect. Rabbi Lewartow offers Schindler a letter, written and signed by all workers that proves Schindler's innocence if he is arrested as a war criminal. Stern then steps forward to present the gold ring. A Talmud statement is carved on the ring. Whoever saves one life saves the entire world. He grabs Stern's hands and whispers to him that he could have gotten more Jews out of Plaszow. Stern shakes his head and tells him that there are 1,100 people alive because of him. Schindler gets upset, realizing that if he had just sold his car or pin, that he could have saved more lives. His workers comfort him by surrounding and embracing him. The workers watch as Schindler's car drives out of the factory. The next morning, a single Russian soldier enters the camp and tells the Jews that they are free. As they walk toward a nearby town, the scene dissolves into full color and reveals a group of real Holocaust survivors walking across a field. They line up and many accompanied by the actors who play them, and place rocks on Schindler's grave. The scene changes to a clip of Amon Göth's hanging. He was charged with crimes against humanity and executed. The Schindler was declared a righteous person by the Council of Yad Vashem in Israel in 1958. A tree was planted in his honor that grows there still. In the end, Liam Neeson, the actor who plays the role of Oskar Schindler, lays a rose in the middle of the grave. If you liked the video, make sure to subscribe so that you can watch more of this. Thank you for watching.